So, Bracken, we are here again. It's honestly a pleasure to be speaking to you and actually be interviewing you. Before we delve into the topic of everything inclusive leadership under, I guess, diversity and inclusion, can you just tell the audience a bit about you?
Sure. I'm the CEO of Logitech. I've been in this job for it'll be 10 years in April, and I grew up in the U.S. In the great state of Kentucky, and I've lived in various parts of the U.S. And then I lived for almost 9 years in Europe, in Germany and Switzerland, and I worked in Italy. So I'm a product of the South in the U.S., which will color the discussion.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, well, thank you for that glowing bio. I want to delve straight into some of the topics that we've got on agenda today. And the first section is all about understanding me. And this really is a reflection of the fact that we're all human beings, first and foremost. But I think sometimes it gets lost in terms of the experiences that some people have, the lived experiences that people have. And until you walk in my shoes, will you really understand me? So, as you say, you're the CEO of a large organization. How do you encourage your teams and how do you yourself try to get to know and understand the differences that exist within the people in your firm?
So how do I really try to understand the individual differences, what makes each person a little different? I think it's probably more intuitive for me than something I learned any other way. I've always been really curious about people, and I like people. I'm an extrovert, and so I've tended to plug into people in a pretty personal way my whole life. And I'm as interested in their personal lives as I am in their work lives, and I think most people kind of sense that. And I personally don't have very strong boundaries about my personal life, and so I'm pretty open about that. So I'm very vulnerable. I've got a child in a mental hospital right now. I'm very open about that. I've had some other tough things have happened. I think that's probably, if you're comfortable doing it, it's probably not a bad idea as a way to try to connect more deeply with people.
Can you give any examples in terms of a discovery that you've made about maybe a group of people or a community of people that you hadn't necessarily appreciated beforehand, and what was the trigger for that discovery?
Well, I guess I'll give an example of something of one area where I really kind of discovered something that, in a way, I thought I already knew. I grew up in the South, and in the South, if you're a white man in the South, you're privileged. But I grew up in a very, very progressive family. My mom and dad were both very, in the U.S. we'd say on the liberal, very extreme liberal side of the ledger. And so I grew up, surrounded by diversity, and my parents were staunch defenders of diversity, equity, and inclusion before we called it diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'll never forget. We were moving from Texas to Kentucky, and my mom was driving the car, my dad was driving the rental truck with our furniture, and we stopped in the middle of actually Texarkana, Texas, I think, and my dad wasn't there. My mom, got us all out of the station wagon, and we went inside to have lunch in a little diner back then that looked like something out of the TV show, from the 1950s. It had the long bar with you get the ice cream soda or whatever, if you get a hamburger or something. So I was 6 years old, and we sat down in a booth there in the little diner, and my mom, as we came in the door, she got stuck up at the front of the counter, which and I didn't really notice what was going on, but apparently she was having a discussion with the person at the front, which my mom didn't do, and I mean like a discussion, like an argument. And then she came over and she grabbed me by the shirt and all of us and just marched us right out of there. And I later found out that there was a sign on the door that once we got inside that she saw that said, we reserve the right to serve who we choose. and she asked the person at the front desk what that meant, and he said, "Well, we don't serve anybody we don't want to. No blacks, no Jews, no service." And so we left. And so my mom was as close to being an activist for a mother of four in those times as you could probably get. So I grew up, feeling like I really got it, and then when I apologize for making this answer so long, but when George Floyd happened here in the U.S., which was just one of many, murders of black men and women that have happened during my lifetime, I was sitting at my dining room table one day, or my kitchen table during the pandemic, contemplating how horrible that was, and it got me thinking about apartheid in South Africa, and I was thinking, I'm a public company CEO, but I was thinking, why didn't those white leaders in South Africa speak up sooner? Because they weren't all bad people. I mean, they had to be a lot of good people in leadership roles. And then it kind of hit me like a frying pan in the head, that I haven't used my platform, and I'm one of those people, who's not doing anything. And it was that moment, that was like, wow, I just did not realize how little I'd done, and that was so transformational for me. And I then went through the process of reaching out to every black friend I had, and apologizing. And I mean, to a person, it was interesting because I got 100% exactly the consistent feedback, which was caring, listening, never saying you didn't do anything wrong, because I did, but never criticizing, and just giving me the feeling, I'm glad you crossed over to the right side of this. And I learned that, and it made me think how incredibly tolerant and patient underrepresented groups are in general with all of us who are not underrepresented. And I felt so appreciative after that. It stimulated so many thoughts in me. Like, one of them was, wow, I'm surprised there's not more violent action, kind of, verging on or even being terrorism in the U.S. around this topic. But it must be just an incredible demonstration of the patience and integrity of the people who've led this movement towards a better world in the U.S. And because it hasn't happened, it just hasn't. There's not been any. I mean, so it made me so appreciative of the attitude of all underrepresented people, but especially the black community in the U.S. I really felt so thankful and so sorry, and I still do. And so it's just one example of where I felt like, gosh, I discovered something big that was right in front of me all the time that I thought I knew that I didn't know anything about. And I'll add one more thing, and I apologize, this answer's going a little long. Since that moment, I've become just an incredible advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I thought I was before. I was on every diversity council in every company I was in. I was leading it. I was setting goals on. But now I know I am, and I'm for real. And I'm only satisfied with the results. Actions are okay, but results are everything. But one of the things I've been trying to do is learn. So I've been in a learning frenzy. Deep learning all the time, not just about people of color, but also about everything, trans, you name it. And it's interesting because just to the point where I feel like I kind of get it, an area, I feel like, okay, now I finally have kind of mastered this. And then I feel all of a sudden my head pokes through the ceiling, and the ceiling goes away, and I realize I'm in this gymnasium again of things that I didn't understand. And so there's so much to learn. And so I just continue to realize how much there is to learn in the area of DE&I.
Wow. Thank you, firstly, for being so open with all of those stories and those examples. I felt like I was really right there with you. Even for that first story, and I know we've spoken about that before, but I felt in that moment I was right there with you, and it was happening. I could feel the emotions that you were actually emitting. So thank you for that. It was quite moving. You also mentioned, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. Two things I wanted to pick up on. One was that you mentioned diversity, inclusion, and equity, and that was something that was a phrase that was used back when you were growing up. I want to step into that a little bit more. The other thing that you also mentioned was action, and we are going to get into that, but I'm going to leave that probably last. But if we go back to diversity, inclusion, and equity, what does that mean to you? What does that mean to you? And how do you ensure that those values that you hold are also felt through your organization? Because I know that this is something that you at Logitech are doing more. What does it mean to you? How do you ensure that your employees, your teams are living this, breathing this every single day? And quite frankly, what do you think businesses should be doing?
What is diversity, equity, inclusion, or inclusion and equity to me? And then how do you bring a company to the point where it's embracing the concept of that? So diversity, equity, inclusion, and equity, and people put it in different orders. So diversity, inclusion, and equity, to me, is it's kind of three different things. The first one is it's about really representing all groups inside your company, so that you look and feel the part of the world we live in. And so, in other words, in so many places, there are many underrepresented groups that are underrepresented inside of organizations, and we pay for that. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Inclusion is about making sure that, it's great to get people in the door, but it doesn't work if they don't feel like they belong there. And I think a lot of companies probably still are doing, but certainly in the early days of this discussion about diversity, inclusion, and equity, we're managing to hire great underrepresented people, but not managing to keep them for too long because they didn't feel like they're part of the game. So how do you create a culture where that isn't true? And then the third one is equity, and I think equity in many ways is the least discussed and maybe even most important one, because it's the ledger. How do I know when we've gotten to the point where it's where it ought to be? And I think it's not until it's not until it's really equal. Well, everybody has a fair shot, but they don't. And because of the systemic biases, prejudices, racism that are built into so much of where we are, you can't get to equal without some way of addressing equity, which means making up for lost time, making up for lost resources, making up for lost lives and opportunities. So I think, to me, diversity, inclusion, and equity is just getting to the starting line that we should have always had. How do you do that inside a company that's a function of this world that we live in, and has probably perpetuated many of the disadvantages that has almost certainly perpetuated many of the disadvantages that culture created, depending on where you are in the world. It's a daunting idea. How do we get to that starting line that's fair? But I think it starts with the top. If you don't believe it as a leader and you don't live it and talk about it, we're not going to get there, of course. And I think the real starting point for getting an organization moving in that direction, and I hope every company will do this, is to redefine the company purpose. Every company's different. Every company's purpose is unique to them. But every company can build diversity, equity, and inclusion into their purpose. And I'll give you an example of how we did. So we took our purpose was enabling people to fulfill their passion. Whether it's customers or our employees or whatever. We added the word "all" after George Floyd, enabling all people to fulfill their passions. The "all" part is easy to talk about. Why all? And it's because we want all people, including those who have been left out of the equation, inside our company and outside our company. So that means if you believe that, if you have conviction around that purpose, it means we have to do this for all people, even those who had the biggest disadvantage to getting there, to fulfilling their passions. A person with disability. How did they fulfill their passions? What are we doing to enable that? And the answer is not much. And it was not much. Now we're doing a lot more. We'll be doing more and more. But it's true for every underrepresented group. So it starts with your purpose, and then it goes down through the company. And I think you also can't get there if you don't know where you're going. So you need goals. And the end game goal is great, but you got to have intermediate goals. So for example, this year, every one of my leadership team members has specific DE&I goals, and they'll be paid based on them because we have specific targets for them. But the biggest target we have is the one that I can judgmentally use as to take them up or down, and that is going to be completely based on diversity, equity, and inclusion performance. I don't have it pegged to that specific number. That will be a judgment call based on the difficulty of the dive and the amount of effort put in. And this time I will reward effort. But in the end, without effort, you won't get outcome. So that's the second thing that I'm doing, is really building into my leadership team's goals. The third one's training. Training is like the default for everything, but I would say one of the biggest problems we have around the world is just people's understanding of each other, of what it's like to be in an underrepresented group if you're not in one, what it's like to be in another one if you're whatever underrepresented group you might be in, and then what you can do about it, how you can interrupt things that shouldn't be happening, and microaggressions and biases and systemic prejudices, recognizing them when you see them and then figuring out what to do about them, So training is a huge part of that. And then the last thing I'd mention is maybe in some ways the one that really touches everything, which is, having responsibility, feeling a sense of responsibility because it's in the purpose and because people are starting to understand it, to touch every element that you can of your value creation process. So I have my head of people and culture, my CHRO, Chief Human Resources Officer. I hate the word human resources, but she is responsible for diversity, equity, and inclusion directly. I'm the number one responsible, and she's, for me, my point person. But she owns it from our supplier. So we'll be setting standards for those suppliers and expecting of them. And then we'll be expecting them to set standards for their suppliers over time. And then we'll expect our suppliers to be diverse. So we have a supplier diversity program that's very aggressive, including developing new suppliers. And there's a whole battery of understanding of that to do. And then going into the company, of course, there's all the hiring practices and promotion and fair pay and equal pay and all those things, all the way into our customers and making sure we're developing products for underrepresented groups, which we are now. So being very explicit about that, making sure we're really doing it. And then, out in the communities where we operate, but more importantly, bumping into and affecting other companies by setting higher standards, by challenging them publicly or inviting them into initiatives, and then up to the board. So she has responsibility for that, and I have responsibility for that end to end to end to end. And I think you need specific plans across all those things.
I love your answers. I don't know if you can see me nodding away in your background. No, you can see nothing. Oh,
I can see nothing.
I think if you hover over the mute buttons, you'll see maybe. But I'm just nodding away at you as you're speaking because there's such depth there. I hadn't appreciated actually the amount of things that you were doing, and I really love what you talked about in terms of the supply chain, because I think that's something that tends to get overlooked because an organization may think, hey, it's in these four walls. Well, actually, it's every single interaction that you have in business. So I really love the fact that you're doing something there. Nicole, can
maybe we take a second to interrupt and talk about that specifically. There's a company called Blue Level Training, and there's a woman named Corinne Bataille who's written a paper that you can find out on LinkedIn somewhere. Corinne Bataille, about supplier diversity. I think it really captures one element of this that's not been discussed very much. Supplier diversity. I think I'm with you. I think supplier diversity might be one of the biggest things any company can do, because if we all have very strong supplier diversity programs, we're affecting all the suppliers to us. If you think about it, the effect you could have if every person watching this, if your company had a supplier diversity program that had really high standards, you'll influence all your suppliers. and maybe some of your suppliers you're a tiny part of, but if all of us are doing it, more and more of us are doing it, it'll have a monstrous effect. And so I'm really enthusiastic about that. And that paper lays out how you go from just going from having the very few underrepresented supplier companies owned by suppliers to start, to bigger groups, and then getting to the value-added part of your business where it's not just cleaning services or catering services or something. You really get to the things that matter.
Yeah.
I think that is a really critical area.
Right. I agree. I absolutely agree. Well, I'm definitely going to check this out, and very happy to kind of spread it with my network. I think it's definitely something that we need to, as organizations, need to be much more in tune with, and also as leaders. It's funny. I was I know I'm interviewing you, but I'll give you a story. But I was speaking to a colleague, last year, not so long after what happened with George Floyd, and we were talking about the need to actually hire. And it felt to me like it was a really good opportunity for our organization to get a bit more in tune with the needs of the community, mirroring actually who we represent in the firm, particularly at the senior levels. And unfortunately, we didn't take the opportunity to really work with suppliers who were quite focused on getting diverse talent into the organization. And we just diverted right back to the default position, which was, well, let's just, call up Joe Blogs because we know them. So I think it's definitely something that is getting a little bit more momentum in terms of focusing in on inclusive supply chains. But I think, as you said at the beginning, the need to advocate for this stuff and put the message out there is where we come in. So I will definitely share that article that you mentioned and quote you.
Okay, yeah, please do. I'll add another story to that. I think when it comes to hiring in particular, that part of addressing diversity, inclusion, and equity, the hiring part, I think that wherever you are, you can play a role in this that's super important. And the one of the roles that I think we all need to play is interruption. I have a story. So I was looking for a head of a specific job, a very big job, and we've been talking about it for a while. The person that it was going to report to came to me and said, "Hey, I found the perfect person. It's somebody I knew from my network. It's great to hire from your network, right? Because your network has all these people in it. You know exactly how good they are. So terrific to hire from your network. So he came and he said, I've got this person in my network. It's amazing. And he had several people interview him, checked every box, and then had me interview the person, and I did. And so, great person. And so I said, well, this is great, but who else have we interviewed? And he said, well, nobody. But this is like the perfect person. And I said, well, we're not going to hire this person until we interview more candidates, and I want to see underrepresented groups. I'm not saying that to make myself look good. I should have done it 1,000 times more than I have. But the truth is, you can absolutely snooze yourself into not being diverse by hiring those people out of people's network that seem like no-brainers. But there's so much great talent out there. Don't fool yourself. Just because somebody in your network is a great fit for the job doesn't mean that there aren't amazing underrepresented people that are a great fit for the job. Maybe much better.
Absolutely. I think you're right. In a word, interruption. We've got to interrupt and disrupt and challenge and speak up and advocate and all of the above.
Absolutely.
So yes, this is motivating me more and more, this conversation. So you, it's almost like you gave us a dive down kind of the agenda, actually, because you covered so much in your last question, which is great. Clearly, innovation is something that has been a big part of your agenda. It's been a big part of your success. How did you ensure that your team see inclusion and diversity as business savviness? Because I guess that feeds into your creativity process. So how do you ensure that you're bringing diverse views you're including diverse views, different views. If people, want to challenge, they're able to challenge. And how do you ensure things like hierarchical obedience is not suffered by junior employees who may be scared to actually put their hand up and say, hey, there's a better way of potentially doing something. How do you encourage that? Before we answer, Lacan, if you just go back to Bracken for the answer. Take my mugshot away.
How do you really draw out the challenges and the input from everybody in the organization, so that the majority isn't just kind of perpetuating itself in your decision processes? And it's a great question. When I first joined Logitech, I certainly wasn't doing this for purposes of DE&I, but I joined a company where people stopped speaking up because they were telling people what the problems were, and the top people, and then the top people weren't changing that, or maybe the top people were even kind of circling the wagons and saying, we got to focus on a few things because we're in trouble. The company was in trouble, and so nobody spoke up. It was like it was like everybody just kind of sat on the issues, and then so when I came, I every time I met with people, I'd say, tell me what's not working here. Tell me what's not working here, and I've kept doing it ever since. So I would encourage, no matter what your objective, if you just want to have a good business and a better career, every time you meet with the people who work for you, indirectly, directly, whatever, or even don't work for you, make sure that your first question, or at least your second one, is, tell me what's not working right now, what's going wrong, because it'll come out. The second thing that we do inside Logitech, which is maybe a little unique to us, that I think does help, is we're such advocates for small teams. I'm scared I spent my whole career in big companies, and they terrify me. There are great big companies. I don't mean great big, but there are great, big companies. But there are also so many big companies that have become these bureaucratic, hierarchical, slow-moving machines that feedback gets trapped in one place or another and never makes its way into a decision maker's vision, or at least not with the right argument. And so nothing happens. So how do you avoid that? Well, one way to avoid it is don't be a big organization. So we're technically, I guess, we're kind of big now. I mean, we're worth $16 or $17 billion, but we're really trying to feel small. I feel like a small company, so we tend to have a lot of small teams. We avoid large organizations. I'm a big believer in the power of pairs. So working one-on-one, I reached this conclusion a couple of years ago that actually most teams are a mirage, or they're an illusion. The only real team there is a team of you and me, and that team of you and me. And the reason for that is that there's one connection. If you add a third person to you and me, there's 3 connections. So we've tripled the number of relationships. If you add 2 more people, you get 5. You've got now 10. So it becomes just overwhelming. And then if you have 10 or 12, so try to have the smallest teams possible, and always think that each team is actually just a multiple of pairs, and focus on those pairs. And when you focus on those pairs, you tend to listen better. You care about the other person more, because it's not a team. It's it's you. It's you and me. And so we really try to do that. If that sounds kind of theoretical, it is, and we're trying to make it more and more actionable all the time. But I really believe in that. In terms of underrepresented groups, in specifically, how do you go beyond that or in other directions to try to get even more out of there? I think one of the things is being very vocal about how important it is. There was McKinsey wrote an article a couple of years ago, or somebody at McKinsey wrote an article about the business case for diversity, and it's been written, 1,000 times since by 1,000 different organizations, and it's always the same, which is, diverse companies win more, better. They're just better, and there's a whole lot of reasons for that. I'm sure we could theorize on that for a while, but they just do, and they will. When I first joined Logitech, I was really focused on design, and I used to, once in a while in the early years, I'd show a chart that showed design companies' performance from a return standpoint, investor returns, and it would be a line that went kind of up and to the right. And then average companies, it would be a line that went up and to the right, but at a much more modest slope, meaning design companies outperformed non-design companies 3-1 in total shareholder returns. Now, what's a design company? A design company is a company that people think of as really good at design. People like Nike, like Apple, I think like us now. And that is absolutely true. But I think it's also going to be even more true of diverse companies that really adopt diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. Those who get on board early, and they're on early, and many of them are going to outperform their peers by a mile. And so I think there's a great reason for that. I think talking about it just not only is the right thing to do, but the right thing to do for your business. It fertilizes the field and helps make it happen.
Thinking about, again, messages for businesses, what other businesses could potentially be doing in this space, because I think it is so key in making sure that you get the right people that are coming through to your organization, as you've just been saying in this answer, and you get that creativity, you get those voices who are speaking up. So what are some of, I guess, the top three, let's say, things that you work with your CHRO on to ensure that actually you've got a pipeline of diverse candidates coming through? What are some of the, let's say, the top three things that are important to you and team?
I'd say in terms of setting the stage for moving yourself to a more diverse organization and having really a better, the right representation across. I'd say, number one is work on inclusivity because, you better get that part starting to move in the right direction, or you're going to be recruiting into a void, because you will hire a few people, who are from underrepresented groups. They'll come in and they won't feel like they belong, and then they'll leave. So that's sort of an obvious point, but it's really important. And that involves training. That involves, really making sure that you've got the leadership of the company in the game. So getting the leadership company fully in the game is absolutely critical, and that requires talking and focusing and making sure that the people have very candid and transparent conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I guess the second one I would say is goals. I'm a big believer in goal setting. I don't set that many goals, despite my being a big believer. But as a result of that, I don't set that many goals. When I set a goal, it matters. And if you set goals and they matter, it's a little bit like it creates hunger, like a desire to make a difference, to close the gap. And so if you have conviction around your goals, which you usually do if you don't have too many of them, you'll make them happen. So setting goals and making sure each person who, especially the top of the company, has specific goals around diversity is really critical. So first, make sure you're moving in the direction of being more inclusive. Second, make sure you have goals around diversity. What would the third one be? Maybe just it's a personal thing. Make it your personal passion. It's just, if everybody watching this, I think, will be somebody who is a person of very high integrity. And I think you can't look at the world we're in and the disparities that exist across underrepresented groups and not realize how unfair it's been. And if you reach that conclusion on your own a long time ago, then I apologize for even bringing it up. If you're kind of reaching it now, like I really think I did during the pandemic, post George Floyd, then maybe another nudge from a comment from me will help. But I really believe that, turning it into something that you feel like is partly your purpose in life. You can have many purposes, but one of them ought to be to make sure that you enable everybody to get a fair and equitable opportunity to make a difference in this world. It's good for the world. It's good for each individual in it. If you really can make that your personal purpose, then I think it really makes a difference. So I would say that would be my third one, because then you'll care more about it. Most of my recruiting doesn't happen on my calendar. It happens from me reaching out to people through networks, randomly, through LinkedIn, through someone that I met through someone, and really wanting to be a better person from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint, a better leader. someone who's attracting great talent and keeping that great talent and growing those great people. So, because they'll attract more people. So if you really care about it, if it's really in your heart and soul, something super important to you, you will make a big difference. So that would be my third one.
Let me ask you another question around unconscious bias. So we've heard and seen, probably your organization has it also, but a number of, let's say, training programs that exist to help people eradicate any unconscious bias they may have. However, my question is flipping that over. Do you think there are any benefits to unconscious or implicit bias, and why? It's not a trick question. But I'd be interested to understand your answer. I'll go a little bit deeper. Some people would say, I've heard the phrase before, but I don't see colour. Meaning, I think everyone is the same and we're all equal. And clearly that's not necessarily the case. Now that's an extreme example where you can't play ignorant. But maybe there are some examples in business where actually it could be a benefit. I'm not aware of anything obvious in my face, but I know it's something that is beginning to be discussed a little bit more in terms of, are there any benefits that we can derive from unconscious bias or implicit bias? And I just love to get your take on that.
Okay, that's a wonderful question. Are there benefits to unconscious bias? Let me answer it in maybe a somewhat surprising way. I'm going to talk about culture. So, in the last 25 or 30 years, starting with Mark Andreessen, who said, or somebody, maybe it wasn't Mark Andreessen. It wasn't Mark Andreessen. I don't know who said it. So starting in the last 25 years, there's been more and more discussion around the criticality and the importance of culture to organizations and how important it is in making them successful and sustainably successful. Culture eats strategy for lunch is a famous quote from somebody. I've heard all kinds of quotes in that direction, and culture is super important. But I think, as often happens when the pendulum swings, it just keeps going, and it doesn't stop until it breaks something on the other side. And the thing that this discussion around culture has broken on the other side is culture is now overrated relative to individuality. Individuality is the big unlock. So I think we all know that culture is super important, but culture shouldn't be defined in these very narrow terms with 50-page documents that give you all the things you can't do. Culture should be narrowly framed in a few values and a few behaviors. And then we should create organizations that are in pursuit of unlocking individuality and the passions of an individual and aligning them with the purpose of the company. And so if you ask, how might unconscious biases actually advantage us? Each of us is different, and underrepresented groups tend to cluster in differences. And so those differences, if they create biases, they're often very powerful positive biases, and enabling the individual or the group to exploit those biases in the interest of driving towards a more passionate, powerful purpose is potentially an incredible unlock. So I'd say, don't stop talking about culture. Start talking about culture as a big tent that can have so many different individuals and so much different type of individuality. And so I guess that's my attempt to answer that question.
Roll me onto the screen because that was a great answer. I've never heard that answer before, and I wouldn't even have fathomed of an answer like that. So I just think that was absolutely great in terms of culture and the individuality of all of us being something then that you celebrate, and that therefore there could be benefit with unconscious bias. So thank you very much for that. We can see why you have the role that you have, Bracken. You've done lots of these before. So another question I have for you, and Lacan, you can keep me honest on time, but I think we're okay.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about, you've actually demonstrated that Logitech are doing so much in terms of setting yourselves up to succeed around diversity, inclusion, equity, in terms of some of the things that you've said that exist in your organization already, which is really, really great to see. One thing I wanted to check is, how do you ensure that your employees, and we touched upon more junior employees earlier, but how do you ensure that all of your employees feel the, let's call it the psychological blankets, the safety of raising their hand against any bad behavior, even if it's a microaggression that actually they would have overlooked, but actually how do you encourage them to come forward, but come forwards knowing that they will be safe? And one thing actually that I think it was actually in one of the courses with Stanford, we were talking about the fact that where you have a group of people, a consensus of people around whistleblowing, I think there's a professor in a different university who has come up with this theory that if more than one person, so if at least two people come forward on the same topic, then those two people will be aware of who they are and can form almost a community and can decide on how they may want to take action. Because one of the issues with whistleblowing first is, do I feel safe enough to whistleblow? Am I going to be the only one to whistleblow? However, when you've done it, if you knew that somebody else did the exact same thing and had the exact same experience, it could have made you come forward quicker. So this professor was really looking at the importance of forming that community. And actually, yes, it will be anonymous. However, if you are okay with it, if you would like to meet somebody who raised the exact same thing, if that occurs, would you like to? And these people are given the option to meet those people. So just be interested to get your take on that, but also the question around how do you actually encourage that psychological safety of your teams when it comes to whistleblowing?
So psychological safety is such an interesting topic because it's arguably one of the most under-leveraged tools that any company can have. You tend to think of psychological safety as the how do I make it safe for you to whistleblow, which is super important. But it's also, how do I make it safe to criticize the strategy? How do I make it safe to criticize this new product? How do I make it safe to criticize the CEO? How do I make it safe to criticize and constructively challenge anything? And that is such a powerful tool that it's disastrous if you think about it, how under-leveraged it is, because how powerful it could be. But it takes self-confidence on the part of the leaders to be able to create a climate for that and to be able to foster a climate that enables that. The whistleblower extreme is so important, but it's really the extreme. And so if you cultivate the whistleblower extreme, you're probably helping to open the door to all the rest of the company. I would say, so let me talk about this specific question of, gosh, what about, can one whistleblower find another whistleblower so that you feel the camaraderie and the completeness that, it's not just me, I don't feel so alone. I think I like that idea. I don't know how to cultivate that, but I'll bet it could be done, and we could probably brainstorm and come up with it. And I hope that the professor will do more research and publish it, because I think it's a really cool idea. I think I'll flip it around, because one bias I have is that I come at every question you ask me through my current job, which is I'm at the top of a company and there's a whistleblower somewhere who wants to speak out but hasn't yet, and the comfort of knowing there's someone else who's spoken out on the same topic could enable them to speak out. I want to enable that. The flip side of that is I actually want to enable so much freedom. And so I want to encourage that kind of speaking up in such a way all the time. So one of the most important things I can do is talk about our foibles and our mistakes and our problems very openly and very vulnerably. For example, I can tell you right now, we're not good enough at drawing out all the whistleblowers in our company. I mean, I hope we're not sitting on a disastrous time bomb, but I bet we're sitting on a lot of things that our company can be better at because we haven't done a good enough job of creating enough psychological safety. So we need to be better at it. And we need, and it's a two-way street, but most of the traffic needs to come from the top down. I need to really make that open because then everybody's going to feel comfortable jumping on the street on their bike and coming in with a problem. So I think this is such an important topic, and it gets framed in its narrowest and most extreme area, which is whistleblowing. But it should be talked about all the time. But the benefits of whistleblowing, challenging, expecting more, and feeling ownership for the company you work in or organization you're part of is so valuable.
My first question is nice and short. So it's really, who do you see yourself as being accountable to when it comes to diversity, inclusion, belonging? And I'll give you some names, but then I'd love to hear your view. So your consumers, your customers, your colleagues, your employees, your family, your friends, who do you define as the audience, or who you are accountable to for diversity, inclusion, and equity at Logitech?
Who do I see as who am I accountable to for diversity, equity, and inclusion at Logitech? I think it's a multiple audience answer. So I think on the one hand, I'm accountable to the shareholder. They may not know how important diversity, equity, and inclusion is, but I do. There are a lot of things that the shareholders don't know are driving our performance or could drive great future performance, but I do. And so it's my job to act on those. And diversity, equity, and inclusion is right at the top of the list. If we are a diverse, equitable, and inclusive organization, we will outperform our competitors. I can guarantee it. And we're not diverse enough yet. And so I owe it to people who own part of this company to deliver that. The second one is I feel like we owe it to the world. The world has trapped so much talent, so much opportunity, and so much improvement in unfair, biased practices and behaviors and structures. And they're so insidious and often invisible that it's just, I feel like we all owe it to the world and to all those underrepresented groups that are out there now and have passed long ago, but lived in those challenging and horrible, in many cases, environments. We owe it to all of them to make it right. And so I feel very accountable to the underrepresented groups specifically. And then I guess the last one is I'm not paternalistic, but I do feel like I owe it to our people. I sometimes I'm a little shy about being a leader. I feel like look, I'm not any better than anybody else in this company. I just do jobs that other people don't have. I mean, that's kind of when you get to the CEO job. At the end of the day, you just do the things that other people don't. Either because things fall between the cracks, or there's only one person can do them because somebody's got to make a judgment call on something. And so I tend to be a little bit shy, though, about feeling paternalistic about kind of reaching out. But this is one that, DE&I is one that only a CEO can lead. Without the CEO's leadership, it isn't going to happen. And so I do think this is an area where, really stepping out and being accountable to your people to help them learn, because it must be learned. Almost all of us, actually all of us, don't understand DE&I principles and practices well enough, including me, and making sure that we're creating those tools and then explaining to people why it's so important is absolutely one of my primary responsibilities as a leader, and it is of everybody else probably watching this, certainly if you're a CEO.
My next question to you around this topic is, we've talked a lot about diversity, even in metrics. And when I say we, I mean everyone, the world, society, communities, organizations. Something I know you and I have spoken about before is the lack of focus on inclusion, particularly, and ultimately how to measure inclusion. So we can measure diversity by counting. Sometimes we have challenges because actually people do not necessarily identify themselves. They don't want to, or they're unaware. So sometimes there are challenges, but we can also measure it by that. We talked about hiring, recruitment, we talked about the supplier chain diversity. But actually, when we talk about inclusivity, which is really the theme of this interview, inclusive leadership. How do you measure? How should organizations measure in how people feel? So as opposed to how diverse the organization is, how many times people are putting up their hands to challenge, but how do you measure how your employees feel? And if it's something that is not fully there yet at Logitech, what are your steps to improving your ability to measure and act on inclusivity in the workplace?
Well, I'll tell you what we do measure, and then I'll tell you what we don't, and what I think is the future of better inclusion measurement. So what we do measure is our attrition rate for underrepresented groups. It's an obvious measure of inclusion. It's an indirect one, but if people don't stay, they don't feel included. And so it's it's a blunt instrument, the blunt measurement of inclusion. I don't think it's sufficient, but it's important to be measured. I personally think the best measure of inclusion is when you look at underrepresented groups and you pull them out separately, how much do they feel they have the ability to fulfill their passions inside your company? It's also indirect, but it's in some ways the most important measure of whether you feel like you have the power to act. And power is what it's all about. When you are not included, you don't feel like you belong. It reduces your power. It reduces your feeling that you can have an impact. When you feel at full strength, full power, the only way to get there is when you can be yourself. So I think if we can get measures, and I think we've got one underway, but when we can get measures where we can really look down at individual underrepresented groups and say they feel as powerful or more powerful than the average, then I think we're getting somewhere. And we're not there yet, but we're going to get there.
I just wanted to do a quick mention a quick plug, actually, because you said that you're there, but you're not there yet. This is actually a topic that is very dear to me, and was actually my innovation challenge on my design thinking module with Stanford. So my topic literally was, how can I help to create more inclusive workplaces and really get a measurement on how an employee feels. Should I give you a quick overview of the idea?
Yeah, I would love to hear. Yeah, it would be wonderful.
It's literally it's just a paper-based prototype at the moment, but the idea is that employees, essentially, it would almost be like an Uber rating for employees. So of course there are a number of challenges that would go against this in terms of accuracy of data, making sure people are not just venting, etc. But the idea is that you have an organization or organizations sign up. An employee could be anonymized, but ultimately you can identify an employee by the location, the region, the business division. So essentially your legal entity structure. Right, and potentially you could link it to a leader or a business manager, but ultimately, as long as you get to know how your employees feel in the UK, you know who's responsible for the UK. And the idea is that employees can rate their experiences on any projects on any given time of the day. And if they haven't kind of checked in, into the app, maybe on a monthly basis, you get notifications. But the idea is it's like a survey, but it's an app-based, I guess, way to allow employees to really talk about how they feel. So I just wanted to say that
I like
because
that. I like that. I like it a lot because it's what I was talking about was a survey, and we have a survey where we use something called we call it Logi Pulse, but today the purveyor is Humu, HUMU. But it's a snapshot we do every once in a while. I like your idea of making it more dynamic and more regular, so that you can feel the tide when it's turning. Because ours is like these road snapshots are not enough. But I think it's a very good idea. You should launch that. You should create a startup on it. You can fund it. You don't have to leave your company to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay,
Go for
it. Tell me,
I'll support you. I mean, I'll be an investor when you start this new company.
You heard it here first, people.
I'm committed.
No. Well, definitely, we can definitely exchange some ideas on that. So thank you, firstly, for the answers. I think that's great. What I also wanted to do was go to accountability. So you then understand how people feel. Great, and you're not there yet, as you say. You've got more work to do. Part of the work that you've got to do, you alluded to it before in terms of your leadership team, and you alluded to making sure that they're held to account. So it just building on that last point around allowing your employees to really express how they feel, but ultimately that's only one half of the challenge. The other half is that somebody is willing to receive and willing to ensure that they have a better lived experience on day 2 if day 1 wasn't good. And that goes back, for me, it always seems to be a leadership. As you said it earlier, it starts with the top. And I loved what you said. I was nodding away intensely when you were talking about incentive rewards in terms of leadership rewards and performance-related rewards when it comes to this. I'm not really sure rewards is the right term, but one of the things that we have seen and had a discussion on time and time again is we can have these diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity councils, governance committees, boards, etc. But unless you are incentivizing, quite frankly, your leadership teams to do this, nothing will happen. And I give you an example just between us and the camera. My organization, we are measured, and in consultancy, I'll talk about maybe in more general terms. We're definitely measured by a number of metrics. One of those key metrics can be sales, so how much business we bring in. The other metric can be what we call chargeability. So are clients paying for us? And those are the 2 core metrics that we focus in on. And at the end of the year, we will perform reviewed against those metrics and the objectives. Now, those are the primary, for some organizations, for some consultancy firms, those are the primary measures that matter. If you have an amazing story in terms of you're a great impact leader, people follow you, you care about people, you're doing a lot on diversity and inclusion, you're a thought leader, you're an innovator, these are all great things. But if you do not hit those 2 metrics, your reward will be reflected as such. And therefore, even if you are very, very focused in on what I call impact leadership, all the other stuff, entrepreneurialism, taking risks, leading people, etc., you're not rewarded for it. So there's a juxtaposition on the time that you end up spending on things that you are rewarded for versus what you're not, and it perpetuates the wrong behaviours. So then the challenge is, well, we should, if we really, really believe in diversity, inclusion, equity, we have to change how our leaders are remunerated. We have to add in a third pillar, everything around maybe impact leadership, which includes diversity and inclusion. But until then, it's very, very hard to make the argument that I should be working on all the other stuff, which I personally still do. But I loved what you said around you are actually holding your leadership team to account in terms of they will be rewarded as such. And I wonder if you could just explain a little bit more about how that came about and was there how it was received, but also how are some of the other measures where you believe you need to hold your leadership teams to account? And in general, what should businesses be doing?
You know, so in the area of how do you hold people accountable with metrics and with the reward systems that we have, you know, I'll explain exactly how that works for my leadership team. My leadership team, people are rewarded on our primary metrics. There are only two metrics they're rewarded for in their primary kind of bonus structure. One of them is revenue, and the other one's profit. It's that simple. And it's a little different depending on what job you're in and what organization you run, but that's pretty much it. Part of it's a company-wide thing, and part of it's the organization they run. On top of that, though, I've worked with my board over the last 9 years to have more and more flexibility on the judgment call part of how we got there. You know, was the difficulty of the dive so high that, you know, even though the person didn't deliver their metrics, they had an incredible year and they should be rewarded as such. So my judgment can go way up. Or honestly, was there just a tailwind driven by some external factor that even though they actually didn't have a very good year, the numbers were good. So that's where that started. But what I've adapted that to be is, how do we get there? You know, and part of how we get there is my decision on what area of how do we get there do I want to focus on. So I've told my leadership team going into this year that the how we get there is going to be 100% focused for me on DE&I. Are we making strong long-term progress to get our organization to the point where we're an outstanding kind of tier one DE&I company? And are you personally making a big difference there? And if you are, then you're going to get rewarded for it. And the reward can be as much as 50% more than you would have gotten otherwise. If you're not, you can be penalized for it. And that penalty can be as much as 50% below what you have normally got. So it's that explicit. and it comes back to, okay, what does it mean? You know, and then how you translate that into specific goals that you can be held accountable and feel like it's fair. So that's really the tool that I've used. Are there other things we could be doing? To your point on, you know, it's very easy to sidestep organization or leadership issues when the numbers are really what you're being measured and rewarded on. And I think it's really true. I think, you know, that comes back to a short-term versus long-term thing. You know, if you believe that DE&I in this case, if you believe that these leadership goals are really going to improve your business, then you're making a short-term trade-off to hit your numbers and sacrificing the long-term. So I always think of it that way and talk about it that way. So I'm a super long-term person, probably almost to a fault. So I will always reward more in the long term. So, you know, there are people who have terrible numbers some years who get great bonuses, and because they're doing stuff that's really setting up the long term. And I'm very, very consistently overpaying for great long-term work, and I consider DE&I maybe the most important long-term work we're doing.
So how do you ensure that you and your teams are great leaders behind the scenes and on stage?
You know, it's really hard to so first of all, you know, how do you make sure that you're visibly leading and not being a visible bystander in DE&I? And as for me personally, and for my leaders, you know, it's a crucial point, and it also reflects the authenticity of the people. You know, it's one thing to say things, and then it's another one to step right into the breach. You know, where the problem happens live, in private and in public. And if you're not the same person in private that you're in public, you know, people feel it. You know, it's somehow palpable. You know, so. I don't know how to say. I don't know how you can ensure it. I think you can try to guide in that direction as a leader. I'll give a little bit of background on how I lead. So generally speaking, I don't see myself as the top of this pyramid that, is this, the classic, pyramid structure company. I also don't see myself as the bottom of a pyramid in the servant leadership model. I see myself much more like you probably do. I see myself as a partner in a big partnership with a lot of partners. And my partners all have a role to play like I do. And they all have super important jobs, and so do I. And we all, there's some overlaps in things, but generally speaking, we each have an individualized job to do. So with that in mind, with that as a backdrop, I think, every time, one of the things jobs that I feel like I need to do is call it as I see it publicly, because that's one demonstration of not being a visible bystander. So, I publish things on LinkedIn that are a little more edgy, maybe, or at least they're very clear on issues that are on issues of DE&I, and I view that as important, so that I signal to my team that they should be doing that in public and in private. And then in private with my team, I'm very explicit, and I interrupt hiring decisions. One of my favorite things to do. I gave an example earlier in this talk, if it made the cut in the edit, that I interrupted somebody hiring somebody for a big job because they hired out of their network, and the network that didn't go through and really interview a broad slate of candidates that included diverse candidates. And so, guess what? They hired a candidate that looked like them or looked like me, or they wanted to, and I stopped it. So I think, being the same in private and public is super critical. Being, standing for what you believe in, having certain values that you just are unequivocal for you, that you're willing to sacrifice anything for. I have another one. I can't give the exact example publicly, but we have an industry partner who was accused of some bad stuff, and a lot of the other companies that partner with them paused their relationship for a while and said, we'll just pause what we're doing. We'll end the relationship, pause it, we'll come back after the smoke clears, I guess. And we ended it. And the other leader was very upset with me. And I had 3 or 4 different calls, and it's a super important relationship for us. But it's a principle, and if you don't live the value, they don't matter. And I think those are the kinds of things that, as a leader, you need to, no matter what size organization you have, whether you're the CEO or the manager of a department, signaling clearly that you not only, first of all, saying what you believe in, and then secondly, acting on it so that people can see that you really mean it, is critical.
What are the 3 things that you believe businesses should be doing right now to ensure inclusive leadership is not just something that we continue to talk about? And then I have more questions.
Okay. Your question is, what are the 3 things we should be doing right now to make sure inclusive leadership happens in companies? And I will give you 3. Number 1, build the concept of inclusivity, diversity, inclusivity, and equity into your purpose statement. Nothing will send a louder message than that. Number 2, begin the process of training your people on diversity, inclusivity, and equity. Nobody knows it well enough. Everybody needs education. It is not a one-time 2-hour course. It is a 10-year curriculum, and it will keep growing and changing. And it'll cover everything from anti-racism to trans over the next 10 years. And you'll need to cover all of it. Number 3, set goals. Set goals around hiring, set goals around inclusivity, and reward against them.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you some questions just around how you think some soft skills and what, like, if you were to give me your top 3 soft skills or the top 5 soft skills that people should be quite focused on to be successful in their careers, what would they be?
Okay, so top 3 soft skills that people should focus on to be successful in their careers. Let's see. I won't give them an order of priority because I'm just coming up with this on the fly. But I'll give you 3. Number one, I hate to call this a skill because it minimizes it somehow, but I would say empathy. The ability to get inside someone else's skin. Jack Welch used to have this way of describing energizing other people, and he said, great leaders have this ability to kind of get inside someone else's skin and energize them. And I think that was really another way of describing they have such a strong ability to empathize that they understand how to communicate with the other person in such a way that really connects. So probably empathy. And then how in the world do you cultivate empathy? I'm not really sure, but I think it starts with being really curious about other people. And curiosity's two things. One is just wonder, and the other one is action. So if you're curious about something, but you don't do anything to find out about it, then it's not very useful. If you wonder about it and then you go seek the answers, it becomes quite useful. And that's what curiosity is to me. So being curious is about other people and trying to understand them better. Empathy is, I'd say, one soft skill I would really cultivate as a leader. The next one, maybe it's the other side of that, is, and this is one that I didn't learn early enough, is vulnerability. Again, I hate to use it as a skill because it sounds so manipulative. I don't mean it to sound that way at all. But I think not hesitating to share your own pain, is probably one of the things that people don't do enough of. Because when you share your own pain, it enables other people to share theirs. And when you can share your pain, no matter what it is, in the office setting, in quotation marks, in a work setting, suddenly you feel like it's home. Like you belong there. I mean, it's the one thing you can say about your closest friends and your family is that you can tell them almost anything, and it's okay, and they'll accept you for that, and they'll even comfort you when you need it. And I think that ability to do that is such a phenomenal thing that it all starts with you and being vulnerable. That doesn't mean you necessarily need to share everything that you feel bad about, all the time, but do develop a strategic ability to be vulnerable. It's valuable and it's important, and it'll help you, and you'll feel better too, and it'll help your people. So maybe that's the second one. And the third one, soft skill. Okay, this is really a hard one. Humility. Most people don't need to develop humility. It comes naturally. I don't know about you, but I know you well enough to know you're humble, and I am too. But if you come off with other people as being sort of not humble, it's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But develop the ability to make sure to communicate your humility in other ways. It's kind of a sister or brother to vulnerability. Make sure that people don't think you make mistakes, that you don't think you think you're almost always right. Just make sure to make jokes about your own foibles sometimes, because everybody, especially some of the most capable people in the world, are the most humble, and I think humility is absolutely crucial to learning anyway. So making sure that people feel that from you is important.
Fantastic. I am completely floored. I knew this was going to be really good, and it really was. It was emotional. It was deep. It was learning. All of the above. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
It's really been an honor, and I tell you, I'm such an admirer of yours that I'm just honored to be part of it. So, thank you.
Don't worry, there'll be more. Don't worry, we can go again. Lacan now, so we can go again.
Okay, great.
So definitely, I mean, I've got lots of ideas to follow up with on Bracken. So I think the work that you're doing is fantastic at Logitech, and I am certainly going to be an advocate for all the great things that I've heard about that you're doing, and I think we need more examples of good leadership. The fact that you've even taken the time out, 90 minutes of your day, and let's be honest, it's going to be quite busy, to speak with us on this topic is, as I say, very, very honoured. So thank you once again.
Well, it's so important, that and I think you're such a key player in the world you're in, and you have such a passion for it. I really do think our company purpose is to enable all people to fulfill their passions, and that's mine too. So I really feel if I can ever help you or Lacan in any way to deliver your passions, you just let me know and I'll do everything I can to help you.
I mean, again, people, you heard it here first. So we will definitely let you know. Okay. We're not shy.
Okay, good.
We'll let you know.
Forward thinking.